A few days later, the woman who had been mocked gave a short interview. She did not revel in the moment. Instead, she spoke about dignity, about how small acts of cruelty accumulate, and about why systems need to protect the vulnerable. She said her decision to call operations was not personal vindication. It was an appeal to the structures that make travel safe for everyone. The airline released a statement acknowledging the incident, confirming that a formal review and disciplinary process were underway and reiterating its commitment to respectful service. The mocking passenger issued a short apology, though the tone and timing left many unsatisfied. The real takeaway was subtler. People were talking about what it means to assume, to judge by sight, to wield privilege as performance. The flight had been a confined stage, but it sparked a wider debate that reached boardrooms and kitchen conversations alike. The woman's calm action had taught a lesson. Accountability does not require theatrics. It requires knowing the right lever to pull and trusting the system to act. Sometimes the most powerful move is the quiet one that triggers the right process. Cliffhanger. Because dignity is not a private luxury, it is a standard we owe to each other.
Stories like this land hard because they are both ordinary and extraordinary. Ordinary because small acts of insult happen all the time. Extraordinary because someone chose systems over spectacle and got results. If you saw yourself in the passenger who sat quiet, this story asks a question: what will you do next time? If this moved you, share the video. Talk about it with friends. If you have stories of witnessing or confronting similar moments, put them in the comments. The point is not to pile shame on one person. The point is to learn how to make public spaces safer and more humane. Subscribe for more stories where ordinary moments turn into ethical tests. Hit like if you believe respect should be automatic, not earned. And remember, the next time you see someone belittled, the smallest possible intervention, a recorded fact, a calm report, or a call to the right number, may create change that looks a lot like justice. Final line on screen: respect is not optional. It is how we travel, work, and live together.
Within minutes of landing, the footage spread beyond the cabin. Clips popped on social platforms, stitched with commentary. Hashtags began to trend. Hashtag grounded for hate. Hashtag respect on board. Hashtag CEO on board. View counts rose by the thousands in a matter of minutes. Newsrooms flagged the incident. Aggregators pulled the most compelling clip, the smirk that turned to shame as the captain announced the return to gate. Email chains inside the airline's PR office flared. Executives demanded a full report. Human Resources began an immediate inquiry into the mocking passenger's conduct, and the ground team prepared statements. For passengers, the moment unfolded like an instruction in civic courage. People who had sat quiet felt a push to speak. A group of passengers drafted a short statement supporting the targeted woman, which a crew member uploaded to the airline's incident log. Influencers on board amplified it. Outside, commentators debated whether the response was too harsh or exactly what was needed, but few defended the mocking behavior. The mocking passenger, meanwhile, faced not only immediate embarrassment, but reputational fallout. Her employer, alerted by social shares and work colleagues, wrote a terse response promising review. The incident became an object lesson in how quickly private cruelty becomes public record in the digital age. Cliffhanger. But the largest effect was not humiliation. It was the way the event forced a public conversation about respect and power.
The call she made was precise. No rant, no threats, just facts delivered in a voice that does not need to shout. She described the incident, gave her location and flight number, and asked operations to note the behavior. On the other end, the person listened and escalated. A message hit the cockpit. The captain's face changed. He left his seat, walked down the aisle, and asked to speak with the passenger who had been mocking her. People craned to see. The cabin that had been a theater for humiliation suddenly looked like a courtroom. "Ma'am, I need to ask you to step back," the captain said. He was calm, authoritative. "Your comments are inappropriate and disruptive. We will not tolerate harassment on this flight." The mocking woman blinked in surprise. She had expected a smirk, not a rebuke. As the captain spoke, the operations center had already pinged the airline's duty desk. Within minutes, a terse message arrived through the aircraft's internal channel. "Hold the gate. The aircraft will return to the gate upon arrival. Passenger behavior logged." That line changed everything. The captain announced he had been informed that the ground team was preparing to meet the plane because of an incident requiring review. Phones that had been recording now transmitted live clips. Social feeds lit. Passengers who had remained passive now whispered the same question: "Is this happening?" The mocking woman's smile froze. She had treated this as a private triumph. Now she was the subject of formal scrutiny mid-flight. Then the announcement that sealed it. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to inappropriate and unacceptable comments by a passenger, we are pausing taxi and returning to the gate. We ask for your patience." Confusion rippled, then murmurs turned into applause. Small, spontaneous, as people recognized the shift. When the plane swung back to the gate, ground staff boarded. The mocking passenger was asked to come forward for questioning. Her embarrassment was instant. Nearby travelers posted updates and videos that would spread in minutes. But there was another layer. A message from the duty desk arrived revealing that the woman who had been mocked had flagged the incident not only as a passenger complaint, but as a security and reputational risk. Her job title was shared with the on-ground team. The ground team now treated the event as more than an ordinary disruption. They logged it with senior oversight. For the mocking woman, the humiliation had moved from being a momentary theatrical pleasure to a formal record that would follow her. For the CEO, the outcome was not revenge. She had only called the systems that exist to protect passengers and the airline's reputation. The result was swift, procedural, and public. Cliffhanger. By the time the plane returned to the gate, the mocking passenger realized her small cruelty had become a headline she could not undo. The mocking continued, louder now, an attempt to turn the cabin's eyes into an audience. The woman snapped a photo of the CEO's boarding pass, then waved it to nearby seats like a trophy. "Look at this," she said with a sneer. "She's probably piggybacking on someone's generosity. Can you imagine?" Phones went up. Some passengers laughed awkwardly. Others looked away. A flight attendant drifted closer, then hovered, stuck in that in-between place where rules and service collide. They could ask the woman to stop. They could enforce decorum, but often, in the moment, people defer to the loudest voice. The CEO did not shout. Instead, she reached for her phone and scrolled through a contact list. Her hands were steady. A passenger 2 rows back caught sight and leaned forward, whispering, "Are you going to do something?" The CEO tapped a number, but did not speak into it right away. She watched the woman who had mocked her. And then she spoke into the phone quietly. "This is her name. Please notify operations." A small exchange, almost invisible to those not looking for the signal. But for anyone watching closely, the atmosphere shifted. The mocking woman felt it first, a prickle of unease. Her laughter faltered. Cliffhanger. Because sometimes the quietest action in the room carries the loudest consequence.
The woman being mocked had a history most people would never guess from a single flight. She had worked her way through school, sat in rooms where her ideas were the only ones that mattered, and earned a reputation for turning problems into strategy. She was a founder and, quietly, a CEO of a company with global reach.
Her journey had been full of microaggressions, of people guessing wrong about her bank account, her resume, her seat. Each slight had sharpened rather than softened her. She learned to listen first, to gather facts, and to respond with intention. This flight mattered. Board meetings the next day, partners to impress, contracts to sign. She had booked the seat because she needed the rest to be at her best. That fact was unknown to the mocking passenger who judged loudly from the outside. Her calm in the face of humiliation was not weakness, it was a choice. She understood spectacle and how it multiplies. She also understood the power of one well-timed phone call, one quiet action that carries force because it is backed by authority, not fury. Cliffhanger. And in just a few minutes, everything she had built would tilt the scale in a way no one on board expected.
The woman doing the mocking was not shy about attention. She had the kind of entitlement that looks like confidence until it reveals itself as cruelty. Friends called her sharp. Colleagues called her competitive. She liked the sound of her own voice, especially when it put someone else down. She had history. At networking events, she had been photographed boasting about bumping someone to score an upgrade. At work, she had laughed when others lost contracts. Privilege had become performance, and ridicule had become an instrument. When she mocked someone in public, she expected laughter, not consequences. That entitlement is a mindset. It treats other people as props for an audience. It assumes apology is cheap and consequences are rare. On a plane where rules and social pressure press in, that mindset is dangerous because it trains people to believe they can humiliate without retribution. The more she mocked, the more she convinced herself she was entertaining a room. She did not look for humanity. She looked for applause. But arrogance blinded her to a single risk. When power is abused, it sometimes triggers people with the authority to call it out. Cliffhanger. What she did not know was that her target was not a blank canvas. She was a person whose life and network extended far beyond that cabin.
Pull back and look around. This flight was not a random commuter hop. It carried executives and investors, people traveling to big meetings, to conferences that reshuffled careers. The first-class cabin was a quiet ecosystem of status, where a joke about someone's place is rarely harmless. The mocking woman pressed her advantage. "Come on," she said, flicking her wrist. "Everyone here knows how that goes." Nearby passengers shifted. A young man with earbuds took off one ear, listening. A mother clutched her child closer, telling them quietly not to stare. Flight attendants paused mid-step, unsure whether to intervene. What made this important wasn't only the cruelty, it was the setting. A closed room with cameras in pockets, a captive audience, and instant circulation. In that small, artificial world, dignity gets negotiated every day, with small slights and loud laughter. This line crossed a threshold where a private insult became public spectacle. The woman who was mocked did not flare up. That stillness made the laughter feel uglier. People began to wonder, who will be the first to act? Will the crew step in? Will anyone call the woman out? The stakes were more than two people. They were about whether civility still matters in a place where power feels diffuse. Cliffhanger. But this flight was about to learn the hard truth. Silence rarely protects anyone.
The cabin felt ordinary at first. Flight attendants closing overhead bins, a soft murmur of conversations, the clack of laptop keys. Then a voice cut through, sharp and amused. A white woman, in a designer coat, seated in first class, laughed a little too loudly at a nearby passenger. "She must have gotten lucky," she said, loud enough for others to hear.
You know how those things happen, right? Maybe someone gave her this seat as a favor. Heads turned. It landed like salt in an open wound. The woman she mocked was calm, impeccably dressed, carrying herself with the quiet confidence of someone used to being judged. She did not sputter or raise her voice. She simply lifted her hand to tuck a loose sleeve, as if the comment were a gust of wind that did not deserve her breath. People glanced at each other, some uncomfortable, some smirking, some recording with hidden phones. The mocking voice kept going, fishing for laughs, leaning into a cruel stereotype like it was a private joke at everyone else's expense. And in that moment, the cabin split into two camps, those who watched and those who would not. But no one imagined what would happen next, because the woman they mocked held something none of them knew.